center, and one of those moderates is Senator Angus King. He is an independent from Maine. He's also a former governor of that state. When we traveled down here to Washington this week, I knew I wanted to talk to Senator King about what it is like to be that crucial swing vote. When stuff does get done in the Senate, it's because you've been able to convince someone like Angus King that he should be going along with you. Well, I met with Senator King outside his office on Thursday here in Washington, and let's take a listen to what he had to say.
The first thing is, obviously, everybody's sick about the families and the way this happened. I think the important thing is, though, that you've got to say, okay, what do we gain from this program versus what are the risks? And clearly, this is one of the risks. On the other hand, this program has been extremely effective in degrading the leadership of core al-Qaeda. And it's done so in a way that has really minimized excess damage, if you will.
Right.
This program is very heavily looked at. We get monthly briefings. Mm-hmm. We've seen it. We've been to the places where it's done. We've seen how it's done. We've seen the satellite feeds. That doesn't mean it's a perfect oversight, but it's not a case where our government is doing something that Congress doesn't know about or is being kept mm-hmm. from us. And the real question is, okay, this happened. It was terrible. Is it worth reviewing and saying we're not going to do this at all, and therefore take away a very potent weapon that, by the way, we're fighting against people that want to kill us. You know, these guys killed 3,000 people on September 11th, and if they could have, they would have killed 3 million. Right. So it's not so easy to say, oh, well, we just don't want to do this because something bad might happen.
A lot of news this week about President Obama, Elizabeth Warren, and opponents in general of the fast track on the TPP, and the president basically coming out with Chris Matthews, in fact, on our network this week, and saying Elizabeth Warren, he respects her, but she's wrong on this. And Elizabeth Warren fired back last night, and she basically said,
no, he's wrong.
Right. Where do you come down on that dispute?
Well, I'm leaning more toward the Elizabeth Warren side on this one. I'm pretty skeptical of fast track, in part because we don't know what's in the agreement. I don't understand voting for something that fast tracks a very complex deal that nobody knows what's in it. My problem is, how do I go to a company in Maine and say, you've got to compete against a company in Vietnam, and by the way, they don't have to comply with OSHA, the Fair Labor Standards Act, the Environmental Protection Laws, the Clean Air Act, and they pay their people 60 cents an hour. But you have to compete against them head to head. I don't know how I can do that with a straight face.
NAFTA, you know, it's been 20 years, and it seems like that's really sort of shaping a lot of people's attitudes right now towards this. Do you look at NAFTA and say that was a mistake?
Well, I look at NAFTA and say it certainly didn't live up to what the proponents said was going to happen. On the other hand, I don't think it was as disastrous as Ross Perot said it was going to be. So I think it's sort of a mixed result, but I think it's something that we have to look at. I mean, we've been doing these free trade agreements now for 20, 30 years, and I think it's fair in this debate that's coming up to ask the question, how have they worked? So now, I'm not ready to say today I'm going to vote against fast track or I'm going to vote against the TPP. I'm willing to listen, and but my analysis is going to be what's in it for the U.S. and what's in it for American workers and American businesses, and try to make my assessment based upon that.
You've been here a couple of years now. You're elected back in 2012, and you have the most unique perch of anybody really in Washington. I mean, you're a true independent between the two parties. You caucus with the Democrats. Yes, I'm curious. Life in the Senate. First couple of years you were here, the Democrats ran it. Now Mitch McConnell and the Republicans run it. Anything different?
I don't think there's a lot different. I mean, here's the key thing, Steve, and I said this to somebody the other day at home. Everybody down here thinks they're in charge, and nobody's in charge, in the sense that it still takes 60 votes, it still takes bipartisanship to get anything done, and yet quite often people say, you know, by golly, we're right, and you know, our people are with us.
Sanders,
but it doesn't
Sass,
matter. If you don't get to 60 votes under the way the Senate rules work,
Shelby,
you're not going to get anywhere. So, you know, we saw that this week. The Republicans had this sex trafficking bill, which was really a bipartisan bill, but there was this Hyde Amendment abortion language in it that was unacceptable to the Democratic caucus, and everything screeched to a halt until they worked it out. They had to work it out.
And the nomination of Loretta Lynch to be Attorney General got tied up in that as well.
That was sort of inadvertent. I suspect, I don't want to put words in Mitch McConnell's mouth, but I suspect he sort of wishes that hadn't happened. Because nobody expected the sex trafficking bill to take a month. It was supposed to take a week or so, and he said, well, we'll get to Loretta Lynch next, and then it kept getting dragged out through the...
But one thing I've heard from a few Republicans when we've talked about the holdup on the Lynch nomination was basically that, you know, well, if you don't like, you know, what Mitch McConnell's doing right now, well, Democrats did the same thing. You know, Harry Reid did the same thing with blocking nominations for George W. Bush. So is there a payback culture here? Republicans have control now and they want to do what they feel was done to them?
To some extent, I think there is, and I think that's unfortunate. And that's, you know, as an independent coming in, you know, a bit from the outside, my feeling is it's like the Hatfields and the McCoys. Somebody's got to at some point say, we're going to quit doing this. And I'm hoping, I mean, Mitch McConnell is a man of the Senate. And he's a partisan for sure. He's got his strong beliefs on coal and other issues, but I'm hoping that he wants to see it work a bit. And I think we're in a period now, and we'll know the answer to this in a couple of months. Let's see how it goes. I'm rooting for it to happen.
Yeah, which do you like better, being a governor or being a senator?
That's a really good question. There's a funny, one of my colleagues, I said, you know, I'm a former governor, what do you think? He said, look, what I found is, if you have a former governor who's now a senator, and you ask them which job they like better, and they say senator, they'll lie to you about other things.
Good answer.
We've actually formed a former governor's caucus. There are 10 or 11 of us, both parties, myself, and it's true. Being a governor is more satisfying in the sense of being able to get things done, set the agenda, set priorities, and get things done. But you can't do things by yourself. You still got to have the legislature. Down here, it's much more frustrating because it's slower, it's more, you know, it's just a more cumbersome process as the framers decided or intended. But on the other hand, you're dealing with issues at the highest level, Steve.
I mean, the presidential race is starting to heat up now. Hillary Clinton got in, and a bunch of Republicans have gotten in. A bunch of your colleagues, or several of your colleagues at least, in the Senate are going to be running.
We have Cruz and Rubio have announced. Rand Paul's
in, yeah.
Lindsey Graham is flirting with it.
Ted Cruz is an interesting one because he's seen as such a sort of he's the Republican-based personified. A lot of people say. Do you have any contact with him? What's your take on him?
I know him fairly well. We came in together. I've had him for dinner at my house. So I have these little rib joint dinners periodically with 4 or 5 senators. I've had, I think, between 30 and 35 senators so far. It's my effort to try to break through some of the demonization so people get to know each other. And somebody said, well, who have you had? I said, well, to short circuit it, I've had everybody from Ted Cruz to Chuck Schumer.
Who surprised you? Have any of them that you've sat down and said, wow, this woman is nothing like I expected?
Well, I wouldn't, surprise isn't the right word, but I think one of my big realizations is these are regular people. These are almost all people that come from, you know, middle-class backgrounds, just like you and I, and suddenly they're here in the U.S. Senate. And one of my favorite hour of the week here is the bipartisan Wednesday morning prayer breakfast. And the reason I really like it is, number one, it's a quiet moment to, you know, sort of get your bearings. Secondly, though, it is the only bipartisan event of the week. It's the only opportunity, other than in hearings where you're sort of at each other, to learn about each other. And the third reason is, and this gets to Ted Cruz, the third reason is every week a different senator speaks. and there's no staff, no press, and it's almost always autobiographical. And it's fascinating to learn about these people's backgrounds, things that you absolutely didn't know.
Well, let me just, we have one more question here, but let me finish with this one. You're an independent, you've endorsed Democrats, you've endorsed Republicans before, you've endorsed President Obama before. Would you like Hillary Clinton to succeed him? She wants to. Do you think she'd be a good president?
You know, I'm the only guy in Washington who can get away with not answering that question. Because I'm an independent, I'm going to let the parties make their decisions about who the candidates are. And, we'll see when the time comes.
Okay. Actually, and I lied. I have one more question for you. January 2017, the new Senate comes in.
Yeah.
How confident are you you'll still be caucusing with the Democrats?
I think reasonably confident at this point.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I went both ways on a variety of issues because I call them as I see them. And I've never met anybody yet that has a monopoly on the truth. And it's true, I vote more often with the Democrats and with President Obama, but there are times when I've differed with him, and that's I think that's the way it ought to be.
By the way, I'm not sure if you can tell, but it was a very windy and chilly day in Washington. Unexpectedly, we came down expecting it would be spring in D.C. Got a little taste of some Maine weather that day instead with Senator King. Anyway, thanks to Senator Angus King for that interview. Up next, Republican